Genghis Khan. The name alone conjures images of horsemen at the end of the world, of cities burned to the ground, of pyramids made from human skulls. They say around 40 million people were killed during the Mongol conquests. Some scholars even think the Mongol invasions literally cooled the planet, scrubbing 700 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere, just through sheer, terrifying depopulation. The Mongols are history's ultimate villains, a terrifying, unstoppable force that boiled up from the steppes to burn down civilization. But what if that story, the only one we ever really hear, isn't the whole story? What if the most brutal empire in history was also, secretly, one of the most progressive? What if the terror wasn't the point, but just the shadow cast by a revolution that would connect and modernize our world? Forget what you think you know about the Mongols. The real story is far more surprising. The Mongol myth we all believed. For centuries, the story of the Mongols has been written by their enemies. And it's a simple, horrifying story. Savage nomads, good at destruction and nothing else, who left only chaos behind. We're told they were a dead end in history, a brief and bloody interruption in the march of progress. It's a powerful story. It's everywhere. And it's wrong. The truth is, behind the curtain of all that conquest, the Mongols were builders, not just breakers. They were radical innovators, social engineers, and the unlikely architects of a globalized world. They forged an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Danube River, the largest single land empire in history. But their real legacy isn't measured in square miles. It's measured in ideas, in technologies, and in a revolutionary vision for how the world could work. This is the story of how the Mongols didn't just change the world. They created the blueprint for a global system. We're going beyond the battlefield to uncover an empire that championed free trade, guaranteed religious freedom, established universal law, and built a communication network that was the envy of the known world. This is the untold history of the Mongol Empire. And it turns out the so-called barbarians were, in many ways, the true visionaries of their time. Apocalypse on Horseback. To understand the revolution, you first have to understand the terror that started it all. The 13th century world was a patchwork of isolated civilizations. Europe, the Islamic caliphates, China, they were all mostly strangers to one another, cut off by huge distances and dangerous terrain. Then, from the windswept plains of Mongolia, came the storm. The Mongol army was like nothing the world had ever seen. It wasn't just an army, it was a force of nature. Every single soldier was a master horseman and archer, taught from childhood to shoot with deadly accuracy from a full gallop. They didn't move in rigid lines, but in fluid, swarming waves that baffled their enemies. Each warrior had 3 or 4 horses, meaning they could switch mounts on the move and cover incredible distances without rest. This insane mobility meant the Mongols could appear out of nowhere, strike with terrifying speed, and then just vanish before a defense could even be organized. Their tactics were a masterclass in psychological warfare. They would often pretend to retreat, luring their overconfident enemies into a perfectly set ambush. They made their armies look bigger by mounting dummies on spare horses, or ordering each soldier to light several fires at night. The goal was to break the enemy's will to fight before a single arrow was shot. They knew fear was a better weapon than any sword. They'd often let a few terrified survivors of a massacre escape, just so they would spread stories of Mongol ruthlessness, making sure the next city would surrender without a fight. And if you defied them, the consequences were absolute. When the Khwarezmian Empire crossed Genghis Khan, he unleashed a wave of destruction that became the stuff of nightmares. Cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, jewels of the Islamic world, were taken apart, piece by piece. In the city of Nishapur, it's said that every living thing, right down to the cats and dogs, was killed after Genghis Khan's son-in-law died in the siege. When Baghdad, the magnificent capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, fell in 1258, the stories say the rivers ran black with the ink of priceless books and red with the blood of its people. This was the image of the Mongols that was burned into the world's memory, a relentless, merciless war machine. They were seen as the apocalypse on horseback. But as real as the bloodshed was, it was only the first act. To find the untold story, we have to go back to the beginning, to a boy who was once an outcast, abandoned and left for dead on the plains of Mongolia. The boy who became a Khan. Before there was Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, there was just a boy named Temujin. Born around 1162, his name meant of iron or blacksmith, and he would go on to forge an empire. Legend says he was born clutching a clot of blood in his fist, a sign that he was destined for great things. But his early life wasn't great at all. It was a brutal lesson in how to survive. The Mongolian steppe was a harsh world, defined by scarcity and constant tribal warfare. Loyalty was a currency that changed hands constantly. When Temujin was just 9, his father, a minor clan chief, was poisoned by a rival tribe. His own clan, seeing no use for a leaderless family, just abandoned them. Temujin, his mother, and his siblings were cast out, left to survive in the wilderness on whatever they could hunt or find. This hardship forged in him an iron will. The story of his life, the secret history of the Mongols, tells of a childhood filled with struggle, including the time he killed his own half-brother over a scrap of food. It didn't stop there. He was captured by a rival clan and enslaved, forced to wear a wooden collar like an animal. But even then, his charisma started to shine through. He managed to escape and slowly, carefully, began to build a following. He saw that the old ways, the endless tribal squabbles and politics, brought his people nothing but violence. He imagined something new, a nation of people united not by who their ancestors were, but by loyalty and a shared goal. This was a radical idea. Mongol society was built on shifting loyalties between clans. Temujin offered a different way. He started gathering followers from all walks of life, even from enemy tribes. He made a key alliance with a powerful chief named Togrul, a friend of his father's, and together they rescued his wife, Orte, after she was kidnapped. That victory sealed his reputation as a leader you could count on. But what really set Temujin apart was how he led. In a world run by birthright, he built a meritocracy. He promoted his generals based on their skill and loyalty alone, not their family tree. Some of his best commanders, like the legendary General Subutai, were former enemies who he had won over. He completely reorganized his society, breaking up the old tribes and sorting people into a military system based on units of 10, 100, and 1,000. This shattered the old clan loyalties and created a new, single identity. Mongol. A new order, law, loyalty, and legacy. With all the Mongol tribes united, Genghis Khan faced a huge problem. How do you govern a nation of warriors without it falling back into the same old chaos? His solution wasn't more war, it was something far more lasting: the law. He created a legal code known as the Yasa. Now, no complete copy of the Yasa still exists. It was likely a secret code passed down orally. But from what others wrote down, Persians, Europeans, Chinese, we can piece together a system that was truly visionary. The Yasa was designed to do 3 things: enforce absolute loyalty to the Khan, bind all the different clans together, and punish anyone who stepped out of line. The law applied to everyone, from the lowest soldier to the highest prince. Things like adultery, major theft, and running away from the army were all punishable by death. The law was absolute and designed to create order. But woven into this harsh code were ideas that were centuries ahead of their time. One of the most radical parts of the Yasa was how it protected private property. One rule said that if you stole a horse, you had to return it, along with 9 others just like it. If you couldn't pay, your children were taken. If you had no children, you were executed. In a society where your animals were your wealth, this pretty much stamped out theft. The Yasa also made sure that property could be inherited, which was a huge deal. Before, a dead man's property just went to the local chief. Now, families could build and protect wealth, giving them a real reason to stay loyal to the system that protected it. But the Yasa's most stunning rule was its absolute guarantee of religious freedom. Genghis Khan was a shamanist, but he ruled over Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims. He knew that forcing one religion on everyone would just cause problems. So the Yasa ordered that all religions were to be respected, and no one should get special treatment. All religious leaders, priests, monks, imams, were freed from paying taxes. This wasn't just tolerance, it was state policy. Mongol rulers would even host religious debates, inviting Christian, Muslim, and Buddhist thinkers to argue their philosophies in court, almost like a form of intellectual entertainment. This foundation of law and order is what made the Mongol Empire more than just a passing army. It created a stable structure that could grow as the empire did. Genghis Khan's belief in meritocracy meant the best people were put in charge, no matter where they came from or what god they prayed to. He actively recruited scholars and engineers from the lands he conquered, weaving their expertise into his new empire. He was building the hardware of an empire, and now he needed the software to run it. The empire that connected the world. Conquering a huge empire is one thing. Actually controlling it is something else entirely. To rule his massive domain, Genghis Khan had to solve the problem of distance. His solution was one of the greatest logistical achievements of the pre-modern world: the Yam. The Yam was basically a medieval pony express on steroids. It was a massive network of thousands of relay stations, set up every 25 to 40 miles along the empire's main roads. At each station, official messengers could get food, a place to sleep, and most importantly, fresh horses. A messenger carrying a royal order would gallop from one station to the next, jump onto a fresh horse, and keep going without a moment's delay. This system allowed messengers to travel up to 200 miles in a single day, a speed that was just unheard of back then. A message from the capital in Karakoram could reach the edges of the empire in weeks, not months. The Yam was the nervous system of the empire. It let the Khans send out military orders, get intelligence reports, and run their territories with incredible speed. Messengers carried a metal tablet called a paisa, which was like a passport that gave them protection and the authority to get whatever they needed. Harming a Yam messenger was a death sentence. But the Yam did more than just serve the government. The Mongols extended the use of this system to merchants. This completely transformed the old Silk Road. For centuries, the Silk Road was a dangerous mess of routes full of bandits and greedy local rulers. The Mongol conquests put all of this territory under one government, creating a period of peace that historians call the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace. Suddenly, the world was open for business. A merchant could travel from Italy to China with a single passport, protected by the Great Khan's authority. There was a saying that a maiden carrying a nugget of gold on her head could wander safely throughout the realm. Trade exploded on a scale never seen before. It wasn't just silk and spices moving west. It was an explosion of ideas and technology. Gunpowder, a Chinese invention, made its way to Europe, where it would change warfare forever. Papermaking and printing also spread west, helping to set the stage for the Renaissance. From the Middle East, knowledge of medicine and astronomy flowed into China. The Mongols even introduced innovations like paper money and credit to make all this trade easier. The Mongol Empire had essentially merged the isolated civilizations of Eurasia into one giant system. They had created the world's first truly globalized economy. They weren't just conquerors, they were network builders. They laid down the infrastructure that allowed goods, ideas, and people to move freely across the world. This was their true, untold legacy. They didn't just rule the world, they connected it. A global culture of ideas and faiths. The Mongol Empire wasn't just one thing. There was a cosmopolitan melting pot, a place where cultures and technologies from all over collided and mixed in amazing new ways. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of the Mongols' practical philosophy. If it works, use it. They didn't have a rigid culture of their own to force on people, so they were free to pick and choose the best ideas from everywhere. You can see this most clearly in how they handled talent. While their armies were Mongol, their government was a best-of album of the brightest minds from across the empire. Genghis Khan and his successors actively hired scholars, engineers, and doctors from China, Persia, and even Europe. Chinese siege engineers built the machines that knocked down the walls of Persian cities. Muslim administrators helped run the government in China. Nestorian Christian women, like Genghis Khan's own daughter-in-law, Sorgaktani Beki, held huge political power and raised sons who would become great Khans themselves. To run this diverse administration, the Mongols adopted the Uyghur script as the empire's official written language. This created a common paperwork system that worked across completely different cultures, from Hungary to the Pacific. It was a practical solution to a huge problem, a classic Mongol approach. This free exchange of people and knowledge led to an incredible cross-pollination of ideas. Islamic scholars brought advanced medicine and astronomy to the Mongol court in China. Chinese doctors learned new surgical techniques from their Middle Eastern colleagues. In Persia, a new style of art emerged, blending Islamic, Chinese, and traditional nomad designs. In China, the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty oversaw a boom in art and literature that reflected this new global culture. Even in war, the Mongols were always learning. They were masters of taking the technology of the people they conquered and making it better. They learned about gunpowder from the Chinese and quickly started using it, developing early rockets and cannons that they then introduced to the West. They became experts in siege warfare, not by inventing it themselves, but by grabbing the best engineers from the cities they defeated and turning their knowledge against the next target. So the empire Genghis Khan built was full of paradoxes. It was born from brutal conquest, but created amazing cultural exchange. It was ruled by so-called barbarians, but was governed with a smart, merit-based, and surprisingly tolerant administration. They weren't just passing through history. They were grabbing it with both hands, acting as the great channel for knowledge that would set the stage for the modern world. The empire's fall and final shockwave. Of course, no empire lasts forever. After Genghis Khan died, his massive domain was split between his sons and grandsons. This created 4 smaller empires: the Yuan dynasty in China, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. The Mongol peace continued for a while, but rivalries and arguments over who should be in charge started to pull the empire apart. The very diversity that had been a strength now helped it break apart, as different Mongol rulers started adopting the cultures and religions of the people they ruled. But the end of the Mongol peace was sped up by a disaster that their own global network helped create: the Black Death. The same trade routes that carried silk and ideas also carried disease. The plague traveled along the Mongol-protected sea and land routes, hitting Europe in the mid-14th century and wiping out a huge part of the population. The world the Mongols had connected so well was now a highway for a pandemic. The chaos was a blow the unified empire just couldn't recover from. By the end of the 14th century, the great Mongol Khanates had either fallen apart or blended into the local cultures. But the end of the empire wasn't the end of its influence. The world the Mongols left behind was fundamentally different. They had violently shaken the snow globe of the 13th century world, and when the pieces settled, they formed the outlines of the world we know today. In Russia, 2 centuries of Mongol rule, the Tatar yoke, had completely changed the country. By centralizing power to collect tribute, the Mongols accidentally helped build a unified Russian state with its center in Moscow. In Europe, the Mongol legacy was just as huge. The flow of Eastern technologies like gunpowder, the compass, and printing changed European society and warfare, helping to end the age of knights and castles and kickstart the age of exploration. Stories from travelers like Marco Polo, whose journey was only possible because of the Mongol peace, sparked a European obsession with the East. That obsession would fuel the search for new trade routes, eventually leading Columbus to sail west. In Asia, the Mongols united China for the first time in centuries, creating a political framework that the next dynasty, the Ming, would inherit. All across the continent, they had shattered old empires and created new political realities. So, back to our original question, were the Mongols just savage conquerors? The violence was real. 40 million dead is a number that can't be ignored. But to only see the destruction is to miss the profound changes that came with it. The untold story of the Mongol Empire is one of incredible complexity. It's the story of a people who created the largest land empire ever, but whose greatest achievement wasn't conquering, but connecting. They were warriors who brought peace, nomads who built a global network, and barbarians who championed free trade, meritocracy, and religious freedom. Under Genghis Khan, a man shaped by hardship into a visionary, the Mongols tore down the walls that had separated civilizations for centuries. They built a legal system that valued order, a communication network that defeated distance, and an economic system that was the first true engine of globalization. They were the bridge between the ancient and modern worlds. The Mongol Empire forces us to rethink what civilized even means. It challenges our simple stories of good and evil, progress and barbarism. Their legacy is messy, contradictory, and deeply human. They prove that history is rarely the simple story we're told. And in the epic story of the Mongols, the barbarians from the steppe were, in fact, the secret architects of our modern world.